Well, friends, we are happily back
Mm.
with another episode of the We Got It podcast because your men's basketball team is headed to the Sweet 16,
Let's
baby.
go.
Such a intense game on
Mm.
Sunday night. They made us wait till the bitter end of the weekend to, see our boys play and find out the result. There were points where it felt a little bit too close to a nail biter. We're going to get into all of that in today's episode. This is going to be just another kind of little mini episode, getting you caught up on the game from Sunday night, and then also previewing the matchup for this Friday. The NCAA men's tournament, while it occupied so much of our time, energy, thoughts, dreams this weekend, I quite literally could not stop dreaming about basketball last night. It was not the only major Spartan sporting event to happen. The women's team also was in the NCAA tournament this weekend. Your men's hockey team was in the Big Ten championship. The women's gymnastics team was in the Big Ten tournament. We got a lot of things to catch up
Yeah.
on, so we're going to dive right into it. As a reminder, the We Got It podcast is an official podcast of Spartans Illustrated, so head on over there if you ever don't know where to find our podcast. We're also on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We would love it if you haven't already, if you can leave a comment or review, leave us some feedback. We are here to learn and grow alongside you guys. That's really what the We Got It podcast is all about. MSU sports for everybody. And that means we're learning things alongside you guys. So you can always reach out to us at thewegotitpodcast@gmail.com as well. Welcome to the We Got It podcast,
a Michigan State sports podcast for everyone.
We're Jonah and Abby, a husband and wife who's probably a little too obsessed with Spartan sports.
And we want to share a little bit of that obsession with you, from casual fans
to die-hard bleed green fanatics.
And we want to make following Spartan sports easy, enjoyable, and engaging for everyone.
Go green!
The Spartans are marching on into the Sweet 16.
Nice.
And It feels good to be back in the second weekend. I know it's only been 2 years, but it's just always so fun. The first weekend tournament, but it's so much more fun when Spartans are advancing and win that first weekend to keep on playing basketball. Just so much fun.
Yeah. Honestly, even though I was kind of losing my mind a little bit during the whole game, it was just like, it's just so fun to root for this team. Like, even when they're making our hearts to have hypertension, like, it's just so fun to root for them. And, there's so many things that we can talk about in the matchup against the Lobos. I hate to give, a Patino any sort of compliment, but I'll let Tom do it. He was very, heaping praise on Richard Pitino and just that team. And I think it's really easy to look at a 10 seed or really like any time in this tournament to downplay these seeds and be like, oh, why is Michigan State a 2 seed having such a hard time against a 10 seed? And you think about like the overall teams in the country, like you're still playing a top 40 team in the country. And a lot of times, like, this is the whole point of March Madness. This is what we've been screaming in our TikTok comments. Like, all these things is that this is the reason why you play the tournament, because you don't actually really know where anybody matches up until they actually play each other, Like, that's the beauty of March Madness.
Exactly. And that's what Izzo was saying, too, in his presser after the game is you sometimes see these seed lines and say, oh, like, we should be able to do this well against a 10 seed. But really, like, it's so matchup dependent. Honestly, Michigan State got 2 kind of tricky matchups against teams that had some areas to their team that are kind of difficult to prepare for, difficult to play against, and to come away with 2 gritty wins. Where first half, especially in both of those games, was
especially
close,
on Sunday,
contested and back and forth, and really to come away with gritty wins in both of those to really just show what this team has continued to show over and over throughout this year is just the ability to finish that game throughout 40 minutes and get the job done.
And that's the key point that I was just going to make, because I think we talked about even like previewing the Bryant game and previewing the Lobos game, the New Mexico game, was that, there are things where their strengths tend to be our strengths too. But I think where you're talking about like the mismatch or the poor matchup is that both Bryant and New Mexico had big, strong, athletic, even like quick.
Well coached.
Yeah, well coached. But like players, and a lot of times like they were bigger than us and faster than us and more athletic. And I think that's something that Tom was saying too in his press conference, is that we don't have a lot of margin of error when it comes to like talent. We don't have like necessarily, I don't know, Jaren Jackson or a Miles Bridges or
picks.
Exactly. I mean, I don't think Jace gets quite the credit that he deserves nationally, especially in the Big Ten. But we were able to play basketball for 40 minutes. And I think that's the key point. Now, in the game against New Mexico, I don't think our defense was playing defense for 40 minutes. And I think Tom was pretty clear about that. I mean, I feel like it's one of the games that we've seen us, I don't even know if struggle is the word, but maybe slip up defensively especially a little bit more than we are used to seeing from this
first
team.
10 minutes. We were kind of letting the Lobos kind of get to the basket relatively easily. We're giving up baseline, giving up guys free lanes to the hoop. And we're able to kind of correct those, especially from the 10 minutes on really to the end of the game.
Well, I was going to say that right at about the 10-minute mark, I remember saying out loud, like, oh my gosh, we're giving up so many points in the paint. Like, they've got to be almost doubling us up. And then right after that, the little graphic came up on the screen where it was like, points in the paint. And it said New Mexico, 16, Michigan State, 8. And I was like, wow, I feel pretty justified right now.
But like they've shown all season, they lock it down. They just turn on that switch that other team just can't seem to keep up with. And that's just what the difference maker is. Even though you might not have a ton of draft picks, this isn't a team that on paper is probably going to scare a ton of teams, or on paper going to like catch a bunch of eyeballs saying, oh, wow, like, this team is a team that you need to watch out for.
Right.
But when they put it all together and they play as a team, they lock in defensively, they rebound the way they rebound the ball, they run the way they run, like, I honestly think that there's not a team in the country they can't beat.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. And I think a big reason is because we've been talking about how like these guys want it more and they care more about the team than individual glory. But I truly think it comes down, if you talk to them, and maybe this is just media coaching from Tom Izzo, but when you talk to them or listen to any of their responses after games, and I've noticed this especially in the tournament games recently, is like people ask them like, how did you change, right? How did you turn poor defense into good defense? You know, what switch did you make? And almost every time they answer, they're like, we just chose to. Like, we just decided. I think Cohen said that. We decided we have to get stops. When he sees it, felt like we were getting punked in that first half. And so I really think, like, when you talk about a gritty win, like, I think about just that, like, digging your nails in. I don't care if you're faster. I don't care if you're taller. I don't care if you're stronger. Like, I'm making a choice that on defense, you are not getting by me. And I truly think on defense, that's some of the biggest thing, is just keeping that mental choice and that lock-in of like, I am not letting you pass me. And I think a big part of things that started really clicking for defense, and I want to shout out Andrew Talks Hoops for this, because he also, you know, analyzed this. He just put out an awesome kind of breakdown of the footage from the New Mexico game, was that in the second half, especially when their big man, 23, I'm blanking on his last name, but it's
Joseph.
okay, thank you. He, you know, had been a huge threat in the paint. He was starting to pick up more fouls. And our guards were doing this great thing where they were kind of like almost doing this half double, where they would come off their man and just kind of swipe at what he was doing. And it ended up leading to him having a turnover. We had a couple of steals. I think Trey had one. I think maybe even Frankie might have had one in that second half. And I think just that decision and that collective like working together to shut them down on defense really is what helped turn that defense into offense, like Tom Izzo wants to do.
And I think that's something that this team has shown over and over again, is that ability to make those adjustments in the game where they're getting beat. Yeah, and especially those first 10 minutes in the paint. Right. And they're able to adjust. They're able to recognize the areas they're getting beat and make those adjustments. That way they're not continuing to get beat for 40 minutes throughout that game.
Yeah, and it wasn't like the adjustment just came at halftime and like Tom needed to do it. They really did, especially that 8-minute mark. They really started to lock in. And I think we went on like an 8-0 run just prior to half. And then I think they hit another, field goal before we went into the half. But yeah, I mean, just defensively, definitely I think some things to learn from. Sounded like from Tom's press conference, they're going to be working on some things this week when it comes to that, because he really said we have to play defense for 40 minutes. And I just was like, that's so classic Tom. Like, nothing less than perfection for him. Like, you will play defense for 40 minutes if you are on my team.
Right, because we've seen, especially if you watch any other games this weekend, like if you aren't locked in, focused, if you're taking things for granted, if you're maybe seeing, hey,
Wisconsin,
we're that 2 seed, we're supposed to win this game. Like at this point in the game, like there is a level where every team wants it pretty much, outside maybe a few performances this weekend. Every team wants it just as much as you. So you have to back up that desire with actual performance. And that's what this team has done, especially, I know we talked about this kind of heading out of the Big Ten tournament, where in that loss to Wisconsin, we had guys like Jace and Kohler not be able to make as big of an impact because of foul trouble. And then we see on Sunday, neither of those guys were really in foul trouble, but neither of those guys had their best game. They were kind of not non-factors, but very little impact in that game. And those other guys, Akins, Frankie, Trey, Fears, Cohen, everybody else just picks up that
Zapala
slack.
even too. That was one of the best games that we've seen from Zap in a while, I would argue.
Right, and that was just an encouraging thing for me is, obviously you want Kohler and Jace to be cooking, but if
please be cooking on Friday
night. If this
night.
team now can, what they weren't able to show against Wisconsin, and pull out that victory when I think two of their most important players aren't making the impact that they consistently do, and they're still able to pull away with the victory, that's just a great sign, I think, moving into this next weekend, where you know that you have 9 guys that can pick up the slack when maybe 1 or 2 aren't having their best night.
Yeah, and I mean, we kind of even talked about that, again, just to repeat your point, like from Wisconsin, of like, is the strength in numbers, like, does it have a weak point, right? Like, if you take Kohler or you take Richardson and or both out, like, what does that look like? And we were able to see that happen again, albeit in kind of a different way, like not necessarily foul trouble, but just they just couldn't get much going offensively. And I would argue defensively too, like Kohler and Jace for 35 minutes of that game, like did not have their best performance. I think Jace really started locking in on defense, like more so in the second half, but it just showed like other guys could step up. And this is where I just really want to shout out the veteran efforts of, one, like Zapala. I know he's maybe not what everyone hoped he would develop into over the course of, conference play, but I think he had some important defensive efforts.
Rebounding.
His 4 points were huge. His rebounds were huge. But then also Frankie Fiddler, Jaden Akins, who we have to talk about for sure, and Trey Holloman. I mean, you know, 3 seniors and a junior on the team who really just stepped up in huge ways offensively. And especially, I'm just going to sit here and talk about Jaden Akins for a minute. For me, he's my player of the game pretty easily. I mean, 1 on the scoreboard. He's our leading scorer, I think, with 16 points. Defensively, that kid never missed a beat. I mean, anytime that I feel like we got beat into the paint, it was not Jaden's man. And we were talking about how much of a slight it seems that he did not get defensive, player of the year in the Big Ten. It just seems kind of insane to me. I can't even think of the last moment that I saw Jaden get beat on defense. Like, he's just an animal out there. And another thing that I absolutely loved seeing from him on Sunday was his dribble penetration, driving to the hoop. I mean, when he is decisive and chooses to go for it, it's like automatic every single time.
Yeah, he
finishes. The little reverses that he had, like, just beautiful.
He finishes at the rim just so well with tough angles, with guys kind of right on his heels. And that was just huge to see those upperclassmen, those seniors, especially guys like Frankie and Zap, who this is their first ever tournament experience, and they've turned into assets for this team. Like you said, Zapala had some great minutes when Cooper was in some foul trouble, and then Frankie, like, that's a guy too maybe hasn't met the expectations or kind of what we thought he would contribute to this team, but what he added on Sunday night was just kind of that like hybrid weapon that just is really hard to defend. Izzo talked a lot about his toughness, his ability to get to the free throw line, his ability to kind of be a mismatch. And I think now them playing him more at the 4 versus the 3, he's able to really capitalize on his size and quickness, his ability to get to the rim when most guys don't have a 4 that can keep up with him quickness and from a toughness standpoint. And he had some big buckets, some big free throws. And it was just like
those floaters were just gorgeous from him.
Absolutely. And that's just another thing that's just so hard to prepare about this team. Now, Frankie at the 4.
I would argue that I think Frankie is like the hardest thing to prepare for on our team. Not because he's like this huge threat, but he's just weird. Like he's just everywhere and like doing things that you don't really expect him to do. And like maybe he might jump in there as a 3-ish.
Yeah.
But then they put him at the 4. Like he's just a little bit of like this annoying, thorn in your side of like, we just can't quite like get it out. And I think he played his role excellently against New Mexico on Sunday. I mean, Trey too, coming off the bench, hitting 2 threes, like really getting our offense going. It felt like in some ways in the first half when we were down. And Tom kind of talked about that. And I really like that he kind of put this whole thing to bed of like, people, right? Like it's entertainment factor. We live off of it, right? Like we're doing our podcast, but I think some people like to like live in the drama of like, oh no, Trey wasn't a starter and then he was a starter and then he's not a starter. And Tom's like, he's our 6th starter. Yeah. He's like, we don't view it like that. And I think that just speaks loads again about the kind of mentality that's on this team is just that who cares if you're in the starting lineup or not? Like these guys know their value on the team and they don't have to have like their ego stroked by being the one that gets starting minutes. And I think it was just interesting too, like this weekend seeing, a different lineup come out in the second half to start versus the first, like just different things that just show like the culture on this team and that these guys know, like we will do what's best. And Trey even talked about that. Like, yeah, I love being able to come off the bench and like bring this kind of energy to the team. And I think it just speaks volumes about the kind of player that he is as well.
Yeah, because you think about opposing teams, thinking about a guy from New Mexico like Donovan Dent, who is being guarded by the likes of Jeremy Fears and Jaden Akins. And then maybe against most teams, when he sees a guard kind of checking into the game, maybe I can get a little break. Maybe I can
this team.
Maybe I can now kind of get things going. But shoot, this freaking Trey Holloman over here checking in, absolute
freaking Trey Holloman
psychopath coming into the game. I get no break.
Yeah.
And you have a guy like Trey who would be the starting point guard for a lot of teams in the country. And he's coming off the bench, not only adding that kind of consistent presence offensively, but just again, psychopath defensively, who's just going to get in your head, going to make life tough, just in the right spots at the right time, grabbing those loose balls, getting those deflections. Like this depth, I know we've talked about it so much this year, but like
someone could probably play some sort of a game with drinks for the amount of times that we say depth during this podcast.
But it seriously is like you have 7 guys really on this team, maybe even 8. Like if you add Frankie, that like are starting level caliber players that you can just play. And I think when you put these guys out there and have these different rotations, like it is just so much for opposing teams to have to deal with, to game plan for, to think about, but then also just in game, like there is no breaks. There is no like, this guy's checking in. Now we can maybe make some things happen, or maybe we can figure out some mismatches.
So in that vein, I feel like we kind of maybe need to talk about the elephant in the room, is that Booker, except for maybe some garbage time at the end of that Bryant game, saw basically no minutes on the floor this weekend. How are we feeling about that? What's the vibes? I mean, I think there were a lot of people calling for no minutes from Booker after the Wisconsin loss and just, the Big Ten tournament in general.
It definitely is tough to talk about because, like, I like Booker a lot. I think he has a lot of potential. I think
we've been, like, critiquing him in the past because we, like, want him to do well and want him to be part of this team.
And I was talking with some people earlier this week, like, do we think we've seen the last of Xavier Booker this year? And I didn't really think we had because it doesn't seem like Izzo ever makes, whether it's for good or for bad, any like drastic changes to like lineup and rotation come tournament time. I think that's been a point of maybe frustration in years past. Like, hey, it's a tournament. Like, we don't have to play our whole roster. We can make adjustments.
Ben Carter.
And we've seen that this year. And Booker isn't getting those minutes. And granted, his minutes have kind of been getting reduced for the last several weeks. But I think as tough as it is I think as good of a kid as Booker is, I think shows just like Izzo, like trusting that he needs to make these tough decisions for the betterment of his team. And too, like I was really surprised when Cooper was in foul trouble early in that, or late in that first half, that Booker didn't see some minutes, but he then went right back with Zapala with something he hasn't been doing recently. And Zapala really had some solid minutes,
and
like we
he
said.
Stepped up. I almost was really grateful to see that opportunity because, man, after, I think it was the Ohio State game. After seeing Zapala in that game, because I think it was the first, like, true Big Ten conference test that we'd seen him go through. Like, before the break, we'd, played Nebraska and Minnesota. But it was really like, okay, on the road, pretty intense environment. And, like, he played so well in that game. And so it felt like, okay, like, he can handle this level of play. And then the rest of Big Ten conference play, aside from, like, a couple games here and there, pretty just, like,
meh,
humdrum, right? Like, maybe a little bit Eeyore. I don't know. Like, I don't know how else to describe him. Like, he's there and he's showing up, but not necessarily like wowing anybody with what he's doing. And so I think it was really cool, especially after the Bryant game, to see him start and then never see the court again, for Tom to give him that opportunity and him to, I mean, again, like if you look at the scoreboard or the box score, like you might not say like, wow, Zapala, but I think that he had some pretty big moments. And I think one of my favorite, I think he got a rebound or a putback or something, and Jonah stands up and goes, Zapala! We all were having a great time.
I mean, just seeing those guys like Frankie, like Zapala, who maybe haven't had the season that they have hoped for, to kind of get this confidence, get this mojo kind of in the tournament. I think it's just so fun to see. And I think as we move on in the tournament, as the opponents are going to get tougher, as the pressure is going to get heavier, like to have these guys have that confidence is huge, because the last thing you want is a team with depth have a guy like Booker have his minutes reduced, and then also have guys like Frankie and Zapala maybe not with a lot of confidence, but they showed up on Sunday night against New Mexico in a really big way, and obviously different positions, but really helped carry some of that slack where Chase doesn't score for the first 38 minutes of the game, where Kohler kind of didn't have his best game, kind of maybe seemed a little nervous out there, a little rushed, and we're moving on. And that's what matters these times. Like as much as like maybe a 20 or 30 point victory is fun, like I almost think is having these games where you have to grind it out, where you have to just constantly be at your best, have to be intense, you have to be focused, just like helps you as you go to the next, because you know that one bad game sends you home, and you have to step up, because not all 9 guys are going to have their A+ game every single night, but if you have to have enough guys have their A+ game, and I think we saw Frankie and Zapala have their A+ on Sunday night when not everybody did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we wrap this up, we got to talk about the cherry on top about beating New Mexico, is that we got to send not only one, but 2 Patino coaches all the way home on Sunday. And that was a glorious thing. Tom had some choice words about that family, and Tom, you were able to get the better of the Sun. So I love that for you.
Before we move on to kind of looking ahead, I do just want to mention quickly, even though maybe he didn't show up as much on the box score on Sunday, but this version of Cohen Carr is just incredible. Absolute difference maker.
I can't believe we haven't talked about him. I think we sang his praises so much on our mini episode after the win on Friday that it's like I'm still thinking that that's the conversation that's going on.
Yeah, obviously after having his career high 18 points against Bryant, I think he had 8 points against New Mexico, but his rebounding, his defense,
his ability to hit free throws,
diving for loose balls. I think there was like 2, maybe 3 times where he like dove and saved a ball out of bounds. Like those possessions, like, and especially in these close games, are difference makers 100%. Down the stretch. When you get those additional opportunities, you get those additional shots up. Like those are the things that make or break NCAA tournament runs. And he, like, Izzo's seeing it. Everybody's seeing it. Like, you saw Izzo, like, had to start him scoring in the second half because he's so valuable to this team. Even if he's not lighting it up on the scoreboard like he was on Friday, he's doing
just
everything
so many
else
elements of his game.
And like you said, his ability to finish around the rim, his ability to knock down free throws, like, man, like he is just on a whole nother level right now. And not many teams in the country can match what he brings to this team. And it showed this first weekend. And yeah, it's just a big reason why we're moving on.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about moving on, the matchup is now set for Friday, and we're going to get you all caught up with what to expect, what our thoughts are on the matchup after we get you caught up with some halftime updates. Well, it was a busy weekend for MSU athletics across the board. We're going to get started talking about the women's gymnastics team who traveled down to Ann Arbor, Michigan for the annual Big Ten tournament. They competed in kind of groups of 4, moving through the 4 rotations, and were in, the top bracket alongside UCLA, Michigan, and Minnesota. And as was the case in the meet against UCLA out in California earlier this season, unfortunately, the girls were not able to pull out the win against UCLA, but they came in second, just 0.3 of a point behind UCLA. It was the first time in Big Ten tournament history where 2 floor routines from the same team got perfect 10s. I'll let you guess who that was, Miss Jordan Childs herself. But the Spartans put up the 3rd best score in tournament history. Olivia Zarmani won the individual for vault with a score of 9.975, and then Gabrielle Stevens tied for individual performance on balance beam with a perfect 10. It was so fun to watch that meet. I mean, as much as I absolutely hate seeing UCLA win, it's just like so fun, and these women are just so incredible. Like I really can't think of another sport where you have more athleticism, strength. I mean, it's
Pressure.
Just flooring what these gymnasts do.
No pun intended.
Yes. And yeah, just really proud of the girls for the way that they competed. Michigan State, I'm going to shamelessly plug this here, is the only school in Division I to send their men's basketball team, women's basketball team, men's ice hockey team, and women's gymnastics team to the NCAA tournament this year. And I think that is a huge thing to celebrate. So we'll keep you updated with more things on the gymnastics team as that NCAA tournament kicks off.
Yeah, speaking of the men's hockey team, on Saturday night, they hosted the Ohio State Buckeyes for the Big Ten Tournament Championship. And boy, it felt like deja vu from last year's Big Ten Tournament Championship against Michigan, where the game went into overtime. Michigan State was holding on to a 3-1 lead in the 3rd period. And the Buckeyes, I mean, credit to them, but
absolutely,
they got some kind of, not, I wouldn't say fluky, but just fortunate bounces. Just like, man, how did that puck go in the net? But they were able to fight through in playoff hockey versus regular season, where you play a shorter overtime period and then go to a shootout. You keep on playing 20-minute full overtime periods until somebody scores. And we nearly saw 2 full overtime periods before,
like, over half the game over again.
Yeah, it was a grind. It seemed like that game went on for 6 hours. I'm not even joking. And man, how about none other than Isaac Howard, who's been doing it all year for the Spartans, gets the goal in double overtime to secure the Big Ten Tournament Championship. Now, the only team in Big Ten history to win back-to-back regular season and tournament champions. And now your Spartans are a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. They will play on Thursday night in Toledo against Cornell, and then will potentially face the winner of the Boston University versus Ohio State game for a chance at the Frozen Four. So a lot still coming ahead this weekend for the Spartans as they hope to make their first Frozen Four in quite some time, kind of alluding to something they weren't able to do last year, but definitely think they have the pieces they can maybe get that done this year, but have some tough teams to get by in order to do so.
Yeah, and the nice thing is there's no chance of facing up against those people down the road in Ann Arbor in the NCAA tournament. Kind of wild, Michigan not making the tournament this year. I'm going to take my punches where I can get them. Now, your women's basketball team also kicked off their NCAA tournament journey this weekend, matching up as a number 7 seed against number 10 Harvard on Friday. They took home the win 64-50, I believe was the score, with Grace Van Sluten being the leading scorer from that game. I think she had around like 15, 16 points, and taking the girls on to the round of 32. Now, something that's interesting about the women's tournament that I don't know, I kind of have mixed feelings about. Like, I think it's kind of cool, but then it also gives like a big advantage to the higher seed, is that in these initial pods, so these groups of, 4 teams are played at the highest seeds, home court. So in Michigan State's pod, that was NC State, who won their game against their initial 15 seed matchup as well on Friday. So then they hosted the game on Monday today. And unfortunately, it was quite the beatdown. The girls ended up taking a loss, 83-49. Again, Grace Van Sluten came up huge. She was the leading scorer again in that game. Really, what hurt the women today was just the lack of being able to shoot well. I want to say that we were like 20 or 30% from the field, somewhere in that range. And NC State shot 50% from 3 from the field. I mean, it's just a hard thing to go up against. Truly a fantastic season for the women. Unfortunately, just like in the men's tournament, it is a you lose, you go home sort of deal. And so their season is sadly ended. But still have a lot of players coming back next year. Among those, I believe, are Theron Halleck and Grace Van Sluten, who have been huge for this team. And I'm excited to see what Robin Freilich can continue to do with this women's team. She did a lot with them this season. I think more than anybody really even expected.
Right, and it was the first time the women's team have advanced to the round of 32 since I think 2009.
Wow, no way.
Yeah, so I
did not realize that.
Even though I think it's easy to kind of see just the history with the men's team, when the women's team necessarily hasn't had that history, especially as of late. So I think a big accomplishment for the women's team and Robin Freilich's team will continue to improve year in and year out. And getting that milestone, reaching to the round of 32 for the first time in 15 years is a great stepping stone for this program.
Be really fun. I wonder if the women will be able to travel down at all to cheer on the guys in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Cool. We'll have to keep an eye out for that. Well, the matchup for Friday night has been set. It's going to be your number 2 seed Michigan State against number 6 seed Ole Miss, taking place in Atlanta, Georgia, with tip-off set for 7:09 p.m. While we might not be super familiar with Ole Miss, we are unfortunately familiar with who they are led by. Coach Beard, who led the 2019 Texas Tech team that unfortunately sent the Spartans home. So not overly thrilled to be matching up with him again. But besides that, or maybe in light of that, Jonah, kind of like, what are your feelings about this Ole Miss matchup? Obviously, they took down number 3 Iowa State in a pretty decisive victory on Sunday night as well. They look like they could be pretty threatening. So kind of, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is definitely not a team to take lightly. Chris Beard's teams are always tough, physical, defensively minded. And so I would expect another dogfight like we saw on Sunday.
It is the NCAA tournament.
I think one thing to kind of think about is 2019 when we faced Chris Beard and Texas Tech in the Final Four. That was against one of truly the elite defenses in the country that year. I think they were top 3 in defense that season. And although this team is the same, maybe philosophy and kind of type of team, they haven't been that level of defense this year at Ole Miss, as he's kind of still building that program there. But they're still going to be a tough, hard-nosed team. Nothing's going to come easy. They're a team that doesn't turn the ball over. They don't make a lot of mistakes. So you kind of have to execute your game. You can't kind of expect them to make the mistakes. So Michigan State's going to have to execute, I think, at a pretty high level, especially defensively, in order to get those stops, because I don't think there's going to be a ton of opportunities to, turn them over, kind of get our offense running like maybe we like to always. So we have to be top of our game to make that happen.
Absolutely. But I think a glimmer of light in that a team, that it takes care of the ball well. I mean, that's something that throughout Michigan State's DNA, like we love to try to, force those fast break points, get those turnovers. But that's not the only place you can get that, right? If you think about Tom Izzo's mantra, what does it start with? Defend, rebound. And I think rebounding is going to be massive against Chris Beard's team. And that's something that I think we have a good matchup on them. They are very poor rebounding, honestly, on both ends of the court.
They're one of the worst defensive rebounding teams.
And we're one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the country.
Right.
And that's a huge spot where you can continue to maintain your possession, get more second chance points. I mean, that was the difference in the game against Bryant. I think we ended up winning 25 points against Bryant, and that was how many more second chance points that we had. Granted, I think Ole Miss is going to be on a little bit of a different level than maybe Bryant was, but the same principles hold, that if we can maintain possession of the ball, that's going to be huge for us.
Yeah, I think thinking about, the rebounding the ball, that's something that I think Michigan State can take advantage of. And if they're not getting those extra opportunities because of Ole Miss turning over the ball, they can definitely get extra opportunities by rebounding the ball. I think that's something that hopefully we'll be able to exploit against Ole Miss on Friday night. Ole Miss, even in their win against Iowa State, was out-rebounded in that game, both offensively and defensively. So obviously they've shown they don't necessarily need to win the rebound battle to win. So Michigan State can't just rely on their rebounding. They have to execute as well. Another really interesting matchup that I think will maybe be the deciding factor in this game is, so far in the NCAA tournament, Ole Miss, although maybe their season averages don't show it, has been shooting 50% from the 3-point arc.
Wow. Yeah, their season averages really don't show that.
And they've been able to shoot the heck out of the ball and really blitz both North Carolina and Iowa State in the first 2 rounds. But unfortunately for Ole Miss, they are playing the number 1 3-point defense in the country in Michigan State. So I would not expect them to be able to shoot 50% against the Spartans. And because of that, I think that although this will be a dogfight, I think this is a game that Michigan State should be able to pull out a victory, just because of that advantage on both sides rebounding the ball, and then Michigan State's just ability to defend the 3, and really that's huge in the tournament, because so many times you see these teams get so hot from 3, and maybe that they're not the better team, but they were the better shooting team and get the win. And I think for Michigan State, being able to have that really be the biggest strength of their team is defending the 3. I think it's going to be tough. Ole Miss isn't going to be able to do the same things they've been able to do against Iowa State and North Carolina.
And to give Iowa State a little bit of credit too, I mean, their leading player on the team has been out with an injury. And so he wasn't, he could have been the difference maker in that game against Ole Miss. And not to downplay them, because like you said, I do think it is going to be a, arm wrestle to the finish for that game. But I do think that could have inflated to a little bit how well Ole Miss did against Iowa State.
I think one other thing to notice about Ole Miss is I think they have 6 different guys that are averaging double figures.
Jeez.
So maybe kind of differently than New Mexico and Bryant, who kind of relied on 1 or 2 guys. This Ole Miss team has 6 guys who average anywhere from 15 to 10 points a game. So a lot of different eyes that you have to be focused on. And obviously defensive guys like Fears and Akins are going to be huge, but all 5 guys on the floor are going to have to kind of bring their A game, because
you're going to need defense for 41 minutes out of 40
minutes. Because there's threats all over the court for Ole Miss, but I'm excited about this game. I think this is definitely a winnable game, and I expect them to be playing for a Final Four berth on Sunday against either Auburn or Michigan, but we won't worry about that opponent. Once Michigan State gets that victory on Friday night, we'll be previewing that matchup for you guys. But overall, I'm just excited. I think you have to love where this team is right now, especially I think not playing their A+ game in this first weekend.
No.
And I think if they can continue to just kind of hatch down on some of those areas that they maybe need to improve on, this is very much a team that can also win this upcoming weekend.
Definitely. And I think one thing that the Spartans are going to be focusing on top of, staying locked in on defense for every single second of that game is locking in on free throws. Yes. That was something that Tom Izzo harped on a lot in the post game presser. And I think things that fans are harping on a lot. But other than that, I mean, I think at this point, like, people have been asking Tom, like, is there anything still to, like, learn about your team or what your guys need? And the response has been, like, we know what we know. We know what we have to do. We just have to go out there and do it. And so I think there's going to be a lot of, talk about mental toughness, about being able to stay locked in, about being able to, make the decision that we're going to do this when other teams aren't.
Yeah. And I think one thing to think about, too, with the second weekend is I think across the board, nerves can be a big factor, especially in that first weekend where it's NCAA tournament. Like, especially Michigan State kind of has a target on their back, being that 2 seed. Not really a position they've been in the past. They've kind of been that underdog 7, 8 seed the last couple of years. So being that 2 seed, having that pressure that comes along with it, I think now in the second weekend, you typically see, not that there's still not upsets, but you typically see the better team is the one that ends up winning the game. And I think that's just one, like, I just don't think nerves will be as big of a factor this upcoming weekend because they have those couple games under their belt. And they know that, like, at this point, there's not really a lot of separation between any of these teams.
No.
You can look at the seeds, but really seeding kind of falls out the door after this first weekend for the most part. And you have to show up, you have to have your A game, and the other team's going to show up and try to have their A game as well. And having Tom Izzo, having this team that has shown over and over again that they can win these tough games, that they can battle, they can take over in the second half. I feel good. I feel excited about this weekend.
Definitely. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. I know maybe today's mini episode isn't quite so mini. We just been waxing poetic about our Spartans over here. But there's been so much to talk about. Truly, again, like, just so proud of the way that MSU athletics have shown up. Even though we took a couple of L's this weekend, like, I'm so proud of our women's sports, so proud of the gymnastics teams for moving on to the NCAA tournament, putting up one of the best scores in Big Ten tournament history. The men's hockey team winning back-to-back Big Ten regular season and tournament titles. And then your men's basketball team marching on now to the Sweet 16. As always, it's a great day to be a Spartan.
Yeah.
So go green,
go white,
go state.